election. Look what happened on Newsnight.
To cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
54 minutes apart. He says he's going to march down peacefully to cheer on Republicans, not so much the others. Perfectly reasonable political thing. And 54 minutes later, he says he's going to fight for his country. A perfectly normal form of political expression, which the BBC, not just once, but twice, decided to move together, merge together, allied to give the impression that Donald Trump was encouraging people to riot, was encouraging civil disorder, was so cross that he'd lost the election, that he was going to try and upend the Constitution. The first time, it was on Newsnight. Now, Newsnight is not produced by an independent production company. It is produced in-house at the BBC. I was there earlier this week on Monday, and they're charming, delightful people. It's always a pleasure to go on, but it is an in-house BBC Broadcasting House production. And this was 2 years before the Panorama programme, an outsourced programme, did much the same thing. The clips are very marginally different. And what does the BBC do? It blames the production company. Whereas, in fact, Kirsty Walk, who was presenting on the night in question, was told by Mike Mulvaney that your video actually spliced together the presentation. That line about we fight like hell is later in the speech. So the BBC knew, and what did they do? Nothing. And why is this? Do you think it's because they don't like Donald Trump? Do you think because the BBC has an institutionalized, metropolitan view that Donald Trump is simply not flavour of the month? He's not one of them. He's not their type of person. He's not papably, you might say. He's not the sort of person you would invite to dinner in Islington. And because of that, because they don't like him, they believed that he might have said it. And that is why they were willing to broadcast it not just once, but twice. And it is said that a little leaven leavens all the bread. And I think this applies here, because what does that mean? It means that in small things you see the whole. You see from this relatively minor editing error made twice by the BBC something fundamental about the BBC. You see what its view is, what its corporate view is, what the culture of the BBC is, and that is a metropolitan, essentially leftist one that finds Trump distasteful, finds Brexit distasteful, finds conservatism, particularly proper capitalist conservatism, too much to deal with. And that comes through in broadcast after broadcast. They've been caught out. And the question is, with Trump threatening them with a £750 million lawsuit, can the BBC survive this discrediting, this crashing of its reputation? Because a broadcaster depends upon its reputation to have viewers trust it. Why would any Conservative trust the BBC? As ever, let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. But I am now joined by my panel. No, I'm not. I'm joined by former advisor to President Bill Clinton, Jim Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, thank you very much for joining me.
Good to be with you.
If this had happened to Bill Clinton, I imagine Bill Clinton's supporters would have thought it was pretty disgraceful.
Yes, I think here it's a case of it not being an error, but I do think it was intentional. Listen, I'm a centrist Democrat myself, which is a vanishing breed, but I think what was done here was wholly unfair, and it risks the BBC standing for blatantly biased camera work. And it certainly will, I think we'll find other examples of it happening. I know down in Australia, Sky News Australia has found an example of the ABC Four Corners program doing something quite similar. And it bespeaks, I think, a bias against conservatives in this case.
And it's very damaging for trust, because people who are in politics are always cautious about giving pre-recorded interviews because they know they can be cut. They prefer to do live interviews. But broadcasters need the pre-records, and no sensible politician will do a pre-record with the BBC anymore.
Yeah, this is, as you said, 50 minutes apart, the two parts of the speech which they cobbled together. It's okay to excerpt a soundbite. That's why politicians speak in sound bites. But this is sound bias because you're pulling together two different strands and making it sound different for the audience. That's propaganda. That's not journalism.
And speaking as a moderate Democrat, do you think that the sort of hysterical attacks on President Trump have actually made him stronger, that there are some perfectly valid criticisms to be made of your president, but they get sort of washed away because people look at the mainstream media and its hysterical opposition to him and discount almost everything that's now said?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I do think President Trump should have accepted the results of the election. I worked for Al Gore in the White House. After the Supreme Court ruled in his election, he accepted the results and he presided over the certification of those results. I wish that had happened in 2020, but that's no excuse for launching basically a biased campaign against him. I think the Democratic Party has made a mistake in focusing too much attention on the personality of Donald Trump and not focusing just on policies with which you can have a real disagreement.
And does this make a difference between the relationship of the UK and Donald Trump, or does he just hold it to the account of the BBC? Because so far he seems to have got on quite well with Sir Keir Starmer.
I think he's capable of compartmentalizing those issues. I don't think it'll damage the relationship. Certainly here in America, we have problems with coverage as well. We recently saw CBS now being overseen by Barry Weiss, who has credentials in conservative politics to some extent. Perhaps the BBC may undergo similar reforms in the future to help adjust it. I think journalism, mainstream journalism, has leaned too far left. My old boss at News Corp, Robert Thompson, talks about the objective of being objective. That's what should guide journalism. And that's been lost along the way because I think, as you mentioned, they've become elitist in their viewpoint, and they basically engage in groupthink, and that's harmful to the craft of journalism.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Robert Thompson, who my father was a huge admirer of when he was editor of The Times. Anyway, Mr. Kennedy, thank you very much for joining me.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living, and maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind the more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
Let me now go to my most phlogistically prognosticating panel, Madeline Grant and Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, can you defend the BBC?
What I find distasteful, not just you, but GBNews and its tone over recent days, and also The Telegraph, is the gleeful way in which you've reported coverage of a clear error, a clear case of whether subconscious or deliberate bias, I don't know, against one of Britain's national treasures, one of our best known, best respected brands, both nationally and internationally. And I find that distasteful.
But it's no good.
Consider yourself reprimanded.
No, I don't, because it's no good being a national treasure if you're tarnished.
Yes.
And it's deeply tarnished, it's failed, but this is symptomatic of how the BBC behaves, and it's extraordinary arrogance, and if its only defence is it's a national treasure, that's
No, I'm not
hopeless.
defending it. I just don't like the way you seemingly take great delight in the very public flagellation, which rightly has to take place. But I think there's ways of doing this in a slightly less, look, goody. How can we punch them a bit more?
Because they're banked rights. They've pretended for years they're not biased, and now we have the evidence. That's why I've been...
It could be, and I believe it is an error. Yes, perhaps there has been a bit of anti-Trump sentiment within the BBC, reflected, by the way, in Britain at large. But I don't think that's institutional bias.
I disagree. I think it's very deliberate, and the fact that it happened twice makes it almost impossible to argue as a result of basic human error, because it's a very deliberate thing to find two clips from quite far away in the footage and to splice them together in such a disingenuous way. And the fact that it's happening not only twice, but in two completely separate programmes with different people doing it, it does suggest a motivated agenda. I suppose part of the reason that some on the right are adopting a tone that, well, Tester thinks is a gleeful one, is partly because for a long time, those of us who have raised these concerns, and for some of us, I would include myself in this category, it comes from the position of somebody who wants the BBC to be decent again, who can remember when the programming was of significantly higher quality and with less editorialising. And we've been kind of gaslit and told that it's not true, that we're imagining it, that this is a kind of right-wing plot. And, you know, it's happening even now when there's very clear evidence of wrongdoing that's sort of undeniable, and not just with the Trump footage, but in all sorts of other areas exposed by the memo. And there are still commentators and many MPs, people like Ed Davey, going full bunker mentality, saying that it's all a kind of right-wing coup that's been imagined by Robbie Gibb, when you're arguing against provable reality at this point.
I think where Robbie Gibb did undeniable harm is he clearly delayed the BBC, who are, and I have personal experience of this, extraordinarily slow when it comes to delivering verdicts, edicts, letters, apologies as a corporation. But he made that worse, and I believe he probably had a political agenda to ensure that the BBC...
We've got no evidence for that at all, Tessa. You're just making that up.
I'm not making it up. He was on the board, and it's quite clear that there was an extraordinary delay of over a week.
He's one member of the board.
OK.
He's not the chairman of the board.
But we also know that he has, if we're talking about bias, he has his own clear political bias.
But so do lots of other members of the board. That's always been the case. The board has been made up of people of different political views to have representation on the board, and the board doesn't make editorial decisions.
But just to clarify, this whole dossier, the Michael Prescott dossier, I mean, it's not worrying, is it, about what the new leader of the Green Party is saying and whether he's being sufficiently represented. The wind is in the sails of the right in terms of this dossier. And I found myself on Radio 4 and World Tonight having to actually debunk some nonsense from a so-called History Reclaim party who had used the dossier to claim that the way in which the BBC reported history was biased. I mean, it's never ending. It's just any chance to attack
Actually, we focused on Trump, but there was some pretty shameful reporting in Gaza where they said that a mass grave was left by the Israeli forces when they themselves had reported a few months earlier that it was Hamas.
Yes, exactly. And there was also, terrible shortcomings in the way that they were reporting issues to do with gender identity and to do with biological sex. And to the point where they have basically an in-house unit that does all of the LGBT reporting. And it's clear that that unit has entirely bought into the Stonewall idea of gender and sexuality. And consequently, it's not just meant that lies have been told to people and journalists have been reprimanded for stating biological reality. I think it also means that the BBC cannot really carry out its job without fear or favour, because if you've been ideologically captured, you're going to be asleep at the wheel for major news stories. And I wonder if, we heard from about Newsnight earlier. They did some absolutely fantastic reporting about the Tavistock Clinic with Hannah Barnes. And I fear that was a few years ago now. The atmosphere report in the memo suggests to me that they wouldn't be able to do that kind of story again. And the BBC needs to get its house in order. It's those of us who want it to survive should not be in the kind of bunker and pretending that this stuff is, we can ignore it because it's politically motivated.
And it does.
It's really interesting, though, isn't it? Because we talk about the need for the BBC to be impartial, but every single set of headlines has been selected. And I would argue, as someone who sits... I'm pretty centre, by the way. I'm not as left as you like to make me out. This is all relative. You are a hard right channel, in my opinion. But I often think, oh, God, the BBC are going with the boats again. Once again, they've taken their agenda from the right-leaning tabloids. And actually, I often have issue because I think they're not pioneering and sufficiently brave. I don't consider them ideologically captured. They may have been naive on the transgender issue. But in terms of Israel and Palestine, in fact, I think they delivered some sort of corrective. But those who support Palestine say, oh, they give 33 3 times more attention to an individual Israeli death than to a Palestinian one.
What should happen is they should lose the licence fee, become commercial, and then they could be as biased as they like. It would be business. Anyway, we're very lucky.
Travesty, that
we
would
are
be.
very, very lucky because we've got a statement from a BBC spokesman who said the BBC holds itself to the highest editorial standards. Don't laugh. This matter has been brought to our attention and we are now looking into it. Jolly good of them.
Thank you, Jacob. And the big breaking news tonight is that the BBC has now apologised to Donald Trump over the editing of a speech which you'll be well aware appeared on Panorama in 2024. The BBC's added that it was an error of judgment. Samir Shah, the BBC chairman, has already apologised for that earlier this week. And the BBC has confirmed that the programme, the Panorama programme, will not be broadcast again in this form on any BBC platforms. Now, you will be aware also that Donald Trump gave the BBC until 10 p.m. tomorrow night to apologise and make a full retraction or face a legal threat of $1 billion. So it appears the BBC has come in more than 24 hours ahead of that to try to dampen this story down. However, it comes shortly off the back of other breaking news this evening that may well complicate things for the BBC, because it has been accused of airing a misleading edit of a speech by Donald Trump, a similar version of that speech by Donald Trump, 2 years earlier than it appeared in Panorama. The Telegraph saying it was used in an episode of Newsnight back in 2022 and was challenged by a guest on the programme at the time who criticised the splicing of the footage. It's claimed those concerns were raised within the BBC, but were ignored. Earlier this week, you'll be aware, Director General Tim Davie and the Head of News, Deborah Turness, resigned. The corporation, as I mentioned, made an apology for an error of judgment in that Panorama programme. Of course, we'll have to see what they say about the Newsnight programme. The BBC says it's looking into it. Mr. Trump, of course, had given the BBC time till tomorrow to retract that and apologise or face that legal threat. It's not clear if that will now go away, because the White House has said tonight it's clear the BBC engaged in a pattern of defamation in order to try and interfere in the presidential election. That comes shortly after the Newsnight revelations. And we have had a statement from the BBC which says it holds itself to the highest editorial standards. The Newsnight matter has been brought to its attention, and the BBC says they are now looking into it. So that is the big breaking news tonight, Jacob. The BBC has now issued a full apology to Donald Trump for the spliced footage it used of his Capitol Hill speech back in 2021, and says the programme will not be used on any BBC platforms in future.
Well, that's exciting but not unexpected news. I'm back now with my panel, Madeline Grant and Tessa Dunlop. Madeline, an apology a day keeps the lawyers away, but they might be apologising again tomorrow.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, that is the way it feels. And we also wonder, will the apology suffice for the president? Will it be something where, given our very close relationship as a country, he's willing to let bygones be bygones now that he's had this coveted apology, or if he will be going for the jugular and looking to exact how much compensation? We shall see. I mean, it's Donald Trump sometimes does have a reputation for being vengeful, but then equally, look at the way that he warmed up to our own cabinet, despite many of the things that they said about him before he returned to the White House. So we shall see.
I mean, he has a reputation in America for taking on and fighting some of the media organisations over there, and a couple have found money down the back of their sofa. I think that was more to do with their own licensing accords and wanting to curry favour with the White House. Two things. One, I have this on good legal authority in America. The $1 billion, price tag, that's performative nonsense. That's not worth the paper that it's written on. I mean, it makes great headlines, but it's not worth the paper it's written on. The second thing is, I'm not sure the defamation case. I mean, this being spliced together on Icky Mickey Newsnight, which since has had a massive editorial overhaul because no one was watching it. I mean, I don't really think that Donald Trump can claim this had a massive impact on his ability to reascend to the presidency. So I think he would be skating on thin ice in terms of winning a lawsuit. Well,
and America, very importantly, has much stronger protections for freedom of speech than we do.
Indeed.
A counter to that, and I don't know about Florida, but a lot of civil cases in America are decided by juries. And a jury for the American president against a foreign corporation sometimes finds that the foreign corporation can pay a lot of money, and that's certainly happened in the past.
OK, yeah, but it would depend on which premise that you were suing the BBC. I mean, if they're going to come to the case and say, well, we clearly made an error, you know, it was quite low down the chain. Like John Birch, remember the old Director General has basically said, well, do I have to account for every single guff at local radio level? I think words to that effect. And this is really what it is. It's actually being blindsided by sloppiness.
That's the last time Tess is invited on Newsnight, calling it local radio.
No, I said this was back in the day before it's had a very impressive editorial overhaul. It's now very impressive.
I always like going on with Kirsty Moore.
If I had to guess, and making predictions on TV is always a bad idea. I think it will be fine, because Donald Trump will want to be invited to Windsor Castle again, or to see our royal family.
So it's all going to be up to the King to save Auntie.